Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Jack McGuinness about his recent book, Building Great Leadership Teams. Jack McGuinness, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from the Chesapeake Bay area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about your recent book, Building Great Leadership Teams. This is really, my area of focus and interest as well. So I imagine we could talk for hours and hours and hours. We're going to try to distill that down into 30 minutes or less. So this will be a nice challenge. Before we get started, I wanted to share Jack's bio with everybody. Jack McGuinness is co-founder of Relationship Impact, a consulting firm focused on working with CEOs to unleash the full potential of their leadership teams. His experience as a management consultant, CEO of a contract packaging company, and co-founder of RI influences his efforts to help organizations build great leadership teams. I love that. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in further?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The background really is sort of foundational for why I do what I do right now. It's, I have some military experience early on. I learned some, I was a junior military officer, and, I kind of learned some of the fundamentals of being in the infantry of leading soldiers at an early age. I learned very quickly what not to do and also what to do. So I had some great foundational experience there at an early age. And, my experience in helping start a management consulting firm with a guy who was about 15 years older than me was really cool too, because it gave me an ability to learn how to build something from nothing, while also learning how to be a good management consultant, and both, challenging endeavors, but I liked both parts of that. And it gave me some a breadth of clients that I had worked with, and an empathy for dealing with business owners who are building their own, businesses as well. And then I bought a contract packaging company after I cashed out of that firm, and that had some great experiences too, because we brought in some new clients, bought some new equipment. We're way over leveraged and cocky, and really, really self-assured that we could fix things. And we did a pretty good job fixing things until the financial crisis hit and we went bankrupt. So I learned a lot from that experience as well. And I think all of those kind of experiences together gave me some, a unique perspective, I believe, on what it takes to build a great leadership team. And it gives me an empathetic approach to being direct, but also having some compassion for the trials and tribulations of growing an organization.
I love that background. And it's great to have diverse backgrounds as we enter this space, because no two organizations are alike. I mean, you could take same industry, same types of products and services, similar customer base. You could list off all the similarities between two organizations, but the reality is every organization is unique because they're a different combination of people and interpersonal dynamics and organizational systems and structures. And all of that leads to, just the need for us to be flexible and adaptable in our leadership approach. So there's no one size fits all to this, as much as, some would try to suggest or claim. And we just have to lean into the complexity and the messiness of just the reality of when you get human beings together, it's going to be complex and messy, right? And that's where the fun of leadership is, though, because there's no, guidebook specifically. You and I write books, and so we try to provide some guidance, and we try to provide some perspectives, some key principles, those sorts of things. But there's no user's manual for running an organization because they're all just so darn unique.
I agree. It's the reason when I was doing some just due diligence on you, I was struck by your book, Blue Indigo Leadership, and the caption on there, or the right up in the back of the book, is really powerful. It's just like there's no one size fits all, and it's really about principles, and that's why I bought it.
Thank you for that. And again, we're here today really to talk about your book. And I always ask when I have a guest on to talk about a book, I like to find out a little bit about the origin story of the book. Right. Because there's 1,000 leadership books out there, and books about effective organizations and teams and such. So there's tons of material. But like you, I also, I tend to put out about a book a year. And this is something I write in this space. I speak in this space. It's something I'm always thinking about. Why this book for you? Why now? And what do you feel like is the unique contribution of this? And then we'll get into some of the details of what you talk about in the book.
Yeah, well, that's obviously it's a great question. I'll start with why I started writing to begin with. When we started this firm about 14 years ago, and it's, as any company does, it morphs into different, we started as something different. And about, I'd say 9 or 10 years ago, we settled in on, we'd had worked with a couple of clients that were very much focused, where the work became very, very much focused on working with their executive teams. And we were like, whoa, we have something unique to say. We have a cool point of view. They seem to be engaged in it. We're making some impact. So, so in the midst of that, I was out to lunch with the CEO of this company. It was a guy a year after me at West Point, who started his own government contractor and killed it. And he said, he gave me some unsolicited but really powerful advice. He said, you have to have a point of view. You guys have to have a point of view. It's not good enough to say you're a consulting firm like everybody else. And so I started writing, and I started really shaping a point of view. And so the book is really a culmination of that, the writings I did. I did a lot of writing for Chief Executive Magazine, still do. But a few years ago, I was like, God, I really should put this down, because we have a pretty cool approach. We have what we think is an interesting perspective. It's similar than other perspectives, a little bit different than others. But then when we started looking, there's not a lot of books on building leadership teams. There's a lot of books on building teams. There's a couple, and there's a bunch of stuff on teams, but not a lot on leadership teams. So we felt like, we had something to say, and that's really where that emanated from.
Yeah, well, and can I just put a fine point on that?
Sure.
It's important to have that distinction of leadership teams. Do principles of good, effective teams apply to leadership teams? In many cases, yes, right? But a leadership team, like an executive leadership team, that is something that's fundamentally different than, me being a middle manager with my team of specialists that do some function within the organization. Right. It's just a very different thing. And so focusing on executive leadership and those leadership teams where you're focused so much on the vision, the mission, the purpose, the high level strategy, those sorts of things, it's just a different beast altogether. So I think there's definitely a niche there that needs to be addressed.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we thought so too. It is different. There's no question about it.
Well, good. So with a little bit of that backstory, and it resonates with me, just the writing, and I'm in the academic space, so I do a lot of academic research. I do a lot of surveying and interviewing and statistical analysis, and I write up a big paper and I get it published in a journal, and like 10 people read it because nobody reads academic journals. And so at some point, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I've always dabbled in the practitioner space. I've done consulting work for a long time, and I've dabbled with writing in the practitioner space, but something shifted in my mind 3 or 4 years ago. And I decided, you know what, I still need to do the academic, peer-reviewed journals. That's part of my expectation as a professor. So I still need to do that, but I need, there's just not as many people that consume that. And so but everything I do is very applied, and all the research I do can, I believe, have big impacts in organizations. So I made the decision, I'm going to start writing articles for various practitioner-oriented outlets with wide distribution to get the ideas out there, to hopefully move the needle a little bit and get the ideas to the end of the row, so that leaders of organizations can actually do something with the research, rather than waiting for 10 years, right, for it to kind of trickle down. And that has been a super rewarding and fulfilling thing for me over the last few years, as that's been a heightened focus, because we just need to be able to connect back to what matters. And, sitting in the ivory tower and esoteric research and theory building and statistical analyses, while important, I'm a believer in the academic endeavor. The impact of that is not going to be as great as if I can actually, share those ideas with people who are living it day in and day out, trying to make it work. Sure. And that's where you come in as well. I see your work in that same vein. It's research based. It has a foundation in rigor, but it also is written in a way that's digestible, understandable to the average leader in an organization, so they can actually do something with it and make a difference for their teams. So that's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, we believe that too. I really do, and it's been good. I mean, it was launched on Amazon on the 14th of June, and got some good traction right away. And so it's been a good experience, getting a lot of good feedback and stuff. A lot of kidding from my friends, of course. But
yeah, very good. All right, so let's dive in. Sure. What are some of those? I mean, obviously, we can't talk about everything in this interview, but what are some of the highlights, some of those key takeaways that you would hope anyone who picks up your book, that they spend a dedicated amount of time to read through it? What do you hope that they take away that they'll remember 5 years from now?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 things that to take away, and you stole my thunder a little bit on the first one, is that leadership teams are just different. They're being on a leadership team is different than running a functional unit, right? You have to have a greater good perspective. To be a great leadership team member, you have to take the perspective of the organization now, not just your function. And oftentimes you have to put your organization ahead of your functional responsibilities. And that, most of the time those things go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. Reprioritization, for example, distribution of resource or allocation of resources, those things are what we see is a lot of fiefdoms, like people protecting their own versus thinking about things from an organization-wide perspective and what's good now and in the future for organizations. So we believe, and that's just one thing that distinguishes, leadership teams from other teams, but it's a really powerful one. So I think, the fact that leadership teams are different, and that leads to the next thing, which is great leadership teams have great structural foundation. And structural foundation are things like, do you have the right people with the right mindset on the team? Do they have that greater good mentality? Do they have an ability to have foresight and think about more than just today or the next 3 months, but also future facing, for example? So that's one structural. Another structural element is actually stepping back and saying, how do we want to operate this team? What are the principles we want to guide this team by? How are we going to talk to each other? How are we going to talk to each other in the room? How are we going to deal with disagreement in this room? How are we going to deal with making critical decisions for the good of the organization? Another important structural thing is what is it that the 6, 7, 8, 9, 5 of us are supposed to be doing, working on together, rather than just as functional leaders. We all have our functional assignments, the head of sales, the CFO, but there are important cross-cutting organizational initiatives that are the responsibility of a good leadership team. Acquisition is one of those. We have a customer a customer concentration problem. That's not just one department, that's the organization's challenge. So the leadership team is focused on that. So having a good structural foundation is really, really important. What we find is that most organizations just throw a group of leaders together and call it a team, and then have report out sessions to the CEO. And that can work, but we don't believe it is as it's taking advantage or leveraging the capabilities of the collective wisdom of the leadership team. So that's number 2. So good structure is another thing.
Yeah. Man, that's so important because otherwise, if you don't have the structure in place and you don't institutionalize those mechanisms of effective teams and organizations, then really you're dependent on the charisma of the leader or the personality, of a particular leader. And what happens when they leave? Good leadership requires you to have sustainability. It requires a leader to be able to work with people who could continue to function and function well, if that, heaven forbid, that leader gets hit by a bus or has terminal disease of some sort or whatever, like you need them to be able to carry on. And so many organizations just don't have that. And so they're so reliant on that individual, that personality. They don't have the institutionalized systems, structures, the processes, practices, procedures. You mentioned some of those cultural elements that are so essential, just in terms of like, what are the norms and behaviors around how we communicate with each other, how we hold each other accountable. I'm doing some work with an organization right now, and my goodness, they're a hot mess. like their leadership team, like they it devolves into screaming matches. They just are not on the same page on basic things. It is a mess. And you really can't do anything to fix that until you get back to the basics of just like, how do we communicate in a civil way so that we can make some progress? So I just cannot, overemphasize the importance of what you just said to having any effective team, any effective organization, but particularly for a leadership team where you have highly experienced, highly skilled, often highly confident individuals, and they can butt heads. And unless you have those systems in place, it's going to be a big, big problem.
Yeah. And I think you hit it on the head, so it's leadership teams are different. It requires stepping back and making sure we talk about what we want our leadership team to look like and do. And then finally, the third thing that we believe is really important is the relational dynamics that reinforce the structure. Right. And so relational dynamics are things like trust. Not so much do we like each other, but do we trust each other's capabilities and character, so that we can have the hard conversations we need to have about the most important stuff the organization is facing, without the passive aggressive stuff, without the lobbying the CEO after the meeting, without the defensiveness, and not without all of it, but without most of it. There's no perfect, right? But productive dialogue is such a critical thing and it's probably, people ask me all the time, what gets in the way of leadership teams being as good as they can be. And I believe, in my heart of hearts, that the ability to have productive dialogue is really critical. And, ultimately the journey we take the organizations, the leadership teams we work with through, is to get them to a place where they can actually hold each other accountable without just the CEO in the room. And that requires trust. It requires the ability to have tough conversations without all the scarring. And because there's too much going on, there's too much for any one person to know. So effective teams can be real strong accelerators for any organization. No question.
Yeah, that mutual accountability and trust is the foundation upon which those relationships happen, in which that communication can occur. If we don't have that mutual accountability and trust, then we're just going to be spinning our wheels. We're not going to be accomplishing much, and we're going to be super frustrated with each other. And we can't have those healthy relationships without it. I mean, every relationship, every healthy relationship is built upon a foundation of trust. And that, I mentioned this organization I'm working with, their executive team's a hot mess. I mean, that's the crux of the problems, is they fundamentally do not trust each other.
Right.
And because of that, they just demonize each other, and they just can't get past, these ideologies and these perceived, chasms between them. And in large, I mean, there are some actual chasms, but in actuality, they're far closer together on most things than, me as an outsider coming in, I'm like, oh, you guys aren't really that far off from each other. Yet for them, it's a hill they want to die on for some minute little detail. And so, those things, we just have to build those relationships. We have to have trust. From there, we build the systems that can help us to have a sustainable leadership team. And then all of that comes back to, what we were talking about earlier. Fantastic, Jack. I think everything we've been considering in this brief conversation, which obviously is fleshed out more in your book, I would encourage listeners to really spend some more time thinking about, and to go check it out, because I don't think we can spend enough time self-reflecting on where we're at in relation to these core principles and topics, where our teams are at, where our leadership teams are at. And it's only once we kind of hold up the mirror in front of ourselves and critically self-reflect and understand where we're at, where perhaps the gaps are, that we can put a plan in place to start to improve. And sometimes that means I need to change. That means I need to open my mind. That means I need to work to mend relationships. I need to work to build relationships of trust. Other times it means I become aware also of some toxic dynamics, in between individuals on my leadership team that needs to be addressed. And sometimes that means you need to replace people. I like to try to work things out whenever possible, but sometimes you need to have a shift, who's sitting on the seats on the bus. And so let's just be thoughtful about that. And as we do that, I think we'll have better, more sustainable organizations where people feel empowered, where they have meaning and purpose, and where they can contribute in their best, most authentic way. Well, Jack, it has been a pleasure. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, share where they can find your book, and anything else you would like to share with listeners. And then and then the final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So you can find my book. I have a book site called greatleadershipteambook.com. It's also on Amazon. If you just look up Great Leadership Team, Building Great Leadership Teams. And my website is relationship-impact.com. Both are ways to access the book. And Jonathan, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. And I guess the last word I would say is that the structural and relational dynamics are inextricably linked. If you have bad structure, it can lead to misunderstanding and bad relational dynamics. And then you try to evolve the structure and people don't trust it. So it's hard. It makes it harder. So it's sort of a vicious cycle. So step back, take a look. And you don't necessarily need a consultant, but you can't just throw people together.
Yeah. Well said. Jack, it's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Jack and his team can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.